Hello and welcome. Today we are honored and humbled to be at Embassy of Ukraine here in Republic of Poland, and with us we have the honorable guest, the Ambassador of Ukraine to Republic of Poland, His Excellency Ambassador Andrei Deshchytsia. So today we are going to discuss about various issues, various aspects of, and also we will try to develop a better understanding of this Ukraine and how important it is in its geostrategic terms. So to discuss with, first of all, Mr. Ambassador, thank you so very much for the opportunity. And
you're welcome.
Thank you.
And welcome to the Ukrainian Embassy.
Thank you so very much, sir. So, first of all, I would like to start with the current geostrategic dynamics that we are dealing through, and in precisely the poisoning case of Sergei Skripal. We have seen the expulsion of over 150 Russian diplomats from over 20 countries, which is a good response, I will say, from the international community. But I would like to have your reaction on this particular issue. How do you see the response taken so far? Is it a good step, small step, or inadequate step?
I do not want to evaluate, but I am pleased that the Western democracies responded on this case, on the case of poisoning of the person in the United Kingdom. And it's a sign of solidarity between the countries, and also a sign that Russia is not allowed to do whatever she wants to do abroad. And of course, it's, each of the countries respond differently, but the mere fact that there was a response is a good sign of united European Union and united democratic world.
Thank you so very much. So I would like to understand a little bit briefly, like this expulsion of diplomats, what exactly message we are trying to give to Russian Federation?
You know, if we want to have if we wanted to send a signal to the country, there are different ways of doing so. To signal that we do not agree with the policy of this country. It could be through statements, through sanctions, through expulsion of diplomats, and nobody wants to have a war. So it's a signal and sign that we are do not satisfied with the policy of certain country.
But I would like to ask, how do you see, because yesterday we had this briefings recently on 3rd of April, the recent one, and in which the director said like they still don't know exactly the precise source of this chemical weapon which was used in Salisbury attack.
Yeah, but we do solidarize with the decision of the UK government and the statement of the UK government. So we do believe that the investigation is accurate.
And Mr. Ambassador, do you think the tensions between the Russia and the West, are they going to escalate after this?
You know that Russia, it's not this particular case. We foreseen the Russian aggressive policy for the last few years. And it was the case of Georgia in 2008, it was the case of Ukraine in 2014, and this policy continues. And in case of Salisbury case, it's a poisoning of the person, persons. But in case of Ukraine, it's thousands of people that are killed. And also the part of territory that is annexed. And it's also the international law that is abandoned by Russians.
So we are talking about Russia, so I would also like to discuss briefly about the recent presidential elections in Russia. We see Putin returns to power first time. The West so-called had a muted response to his, we did not see much briefings or much discussions about the outcome of the elections so far, but of course it was followed by the Salisbury attack that wholly diverted the attention of the international community. So I would like to ask, does the Ukraine see this elections outcome as an opportunity? Maybe we can develop further with the Russian Federation to come to some dialogues?
The result was expected. Also, we do not recognize the whole elections results, because the elections were held in Crimea, which is occupied and annexed by Russia, and it's a territory of Ukraine, and it was illegal occupation. So if you have elections on a legal territory, which means it means also that the elections in whole are not legal. But it's up to Russians to decide who is their leader. They elected Mr. Putin for the first time.
But does Ukraine see this as a sort of opportunity to somehow...
We will continue to work with the president of Russia, because we have a number of mechanisms, platforms, where Russia is involved to stabilize situation in eastern Ukraine, in the Crimea.
Also, Mr. Ambassador, we would like to ask, maybe there's a lack of better understanding about the Russian politics in the outer world. Maybe you can explain us a bit more, because you have also served, you were also the advocate for sanctions in your capacity as a foreign minister. You also termed the so-called separatists, you termed them as a terrorist. So can you briefly describe us, like, how do you see this Russian politics, internal politics? Like?
You know, we call it, recently we started to call this hybrid war and hybrid approach, which is not the war that we used to know from the past. And Russia is using different mechanisms to destabilize situation in Ukraine or in Europe, for example, through melting into the elections campaign, through poisoning, through Nord Stream 2 project. And this is exactly the activities that could be called as the hybrid war. It's not the war with tanks, but it's also, but in different way. The war which is done through propaganda, through bribes, through different type of activities that are directed to destabilize and melt the unity of the European Union or other unions.
But your comments also reminds me of the comments made by your Foreign Minister, Excellency Pavlo Klimkin, in 2017 at auspice of United Nations Security Council meeting in New York. He stated, and I quote, "From Russia there is a possibility of military intervention, conventional intervention and hybrid intervention." So is there any understanding within the Kremlin, like if the world, or in the West especially, they think precisely about Russia in this way, maybe they should change their strategy or their approach?
You know, we experience the military invasion, Russian military invasion into Ukraine. First it started in the Crimea, with the annexation of Crimea. Then in eastern Ukraine, in Donbass and in Donetsk and Lugansk region. It was a military offensive, intervention offensive. But then Russia left some of the weapons in this territory. They left some of the military staff, some of the military experts, And then now they're creating a hotspot in this area, in this region, to keep everyone unsecure. And we understand that Russia, we consider that Russia wants to rebuild its power in this region. Russia does not want to agree with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. That Russia wants to be again a superpower. And instead of doing so to be a superpower by improving economic situation in Russia, introducing new technology, studying its people, increasing level of standard of living in Russia, Russia wants to occupy in new territories. And this is not a right approach in the 21st century.
Well, as a student of international relations, I would like to have a little bit deeper and better understanding. As we know, Your Excellency, Russia is a big country. It has a huge military. It's incredible in its resources, obviously. So what leverage does Ukraine see? What do you need, most from the West in order to come to the conclusion or the resolution of this aggression?
We need more solidarity. We need more political support. We need a continuation of sanctions on Russia, because nobody wants to have a war. But sanctions is an approach at this moment that could be applied to aggressive Russian policy. And we want to have a perspective of being part of European and Euro-Atlantic, not only part, be member of European and Euro-Atlantic structures like European Union and NATO.
But are these sanctions really working?
I think yes. I believe yes. I believe that these sanctions are working, and Russia feels it. And a good sign of its effect, of their effectiveness, is the fact that Russia did not continue its military operations in Ukraine in late 2014-15, when they were introduced.
Okay,
because Russia do understand that if they will continue to go forward, the sanctions will be even more stronger.
Okay, so let's come back to the Ukraine crisis. As I mentioned you during our pre-interview session, I am from Pakistan. I represent Pakistan. And also, unfortunately, there is a lack of better understanding of this Ukraine crisis. Could you please briefly explain us about the current status of, I call it Ukraine crisis, but then you mentioned it's Russian aggression.
With this term Ukraine crisis I do not agree, because we do call it and consider it the Russian aggression on Ukraine. Because with Russian troops, with Russian military, with Russian support, financial support, military support, there will be no crisis. And we should remember about two stages of Russian invasion: Crimea and Eastern Ukraine. Crimea was taken by military force, and then Russia did organize a so-called referendum. In the without presence of international observers, without giving a chance for Ukrainian political parties to present their position, instead of this, with Russian military and Kalashnikovs on the polling stations, where you cannot express your will freely. Another stage is invasion into eastern Ukraine, with Russian troops, tanks, grads, this I do not remember heavy artillery, yes, rockets and military stuff. Without Russian troops there, there would be no fighting. If Russia withdraw their troops, there will be no fighting. There will be a chance to talks and to negotiate a peace solution of this crisis.
And that brings.
That's why it's happening in Ukraine, but was provoked and developed by Russian aggression.
All right, thank you so very much. So we also heard about Minsk agreement too. So what is the current stage of this Minsk agreement?
I would say that Minsk agreement at this moment is the instrument that allow us to minimize the fighting between two sides and give a chance to at least for a kind of stabilization in the region. It was not fulfilled in full because one of the points of this agreement is the withdrawal of Russian troops from eastern Ukraine and allowance to the international monitors, particularly to the special monitoring mission of OSCE special monitoring mission, to monitor the situation on the ground.
All right.
And it was not done so. But we do not have another instrument at the moment.
But at the same time, Organization of United Nations Commission for Human Rights, their High Commissioner Zaid Rad Al-Hussein, speaking to United Nations Human Rights Council, he stated, and I quote, "Key commitments made under the Minsk agreement continue to be largely ignored from either sides."
Because we cannot implement the Minsk agreement in full until Russian troops are present on Ukrainian territory.
So you mean like as Mr. Poroshenko said also recently in Munich Security Conference, like they want the lines to be withdrawn?
Withdrawn. Russian troops are withdrawn. Military and financial support from Russia is withdrawn. Then there is much more opportunities for means to be implemented.
So how do you see this UN peacekeepers idea in this scenario?
It's one of the options. However, we do perfectly understand that it's very difficult to be implemented because of the Russia veto right in the Security Council. And our arguments for this and our position for implementation of this UN security forces, peacekeepers in this region, based on the suggestion that this peacekeepers operation should be on the whole territory of Ukraine, including up to the Ukrainian-Russian border.
But why the Ukrainian draft has not been presented to the public so far on this?
Because it's still in the process of negotiations with our partners in the UN.
I have a very glowing picture of Ukraine crisis. Unfortunately, I have gathered some statistics. They say like more than 10,000 casualties and like 1.7 million people are displaced today in Ukraine. Donbass and Lugansk region, as well as the Crimea, is still under the, as we call it, under the oppression of Russian-backed separatists. Yeah. Over 750,000 children are deprived from the safe drinking water, as reported by United Nations Children's Fund. So, do you see is peace possible in Ukraine, Mr. Ambassador?
Everyone is looking for peace and for peace solution and peaceful solution of this crisis. And we have a lot of victims. We don't want to have more victims on both sides. And that is why the diplomatic and political approach is very high on the agenda of this process.
All right, thank you so very much. And lastly, I would like to briefly ask about this because the core of let's discuss about Pakistan and Ukraine, our friendly relationships. I remember I also had an honor and privilege to serve in our Pakistan embassy as a part of my academic program. I also work in digital diplomacy programs in Ukraine. So as we also know that Pakistan-Ukraine relations are mostly civil military based relationships. So given the facts we have discussed about this Russian aggression in Ukraine, and also we know there are lots of defense deals. The last one was over $600 million US dollar deal signed between Ukraine and Pakistan, where Pakistan buys Ukrainian military industrial complex. We buy different artilleries from tanks from Ukraine. So under the given circumstances, under this fragile security environment within Ukrainian territory, and given the fact that we have the industry not functioning today, unfortunately, in this Lugansk region, so do you think this Ukraine will be able to meet its requirement? Because I had this question from someone from our side, from Pakistan.
So I do not agree with you in full, in the fact that we are not able to fulfill the agreements because of the occupation of eastern part of Ukraine. Moreover,
because the industry is mostly
industrial, right? That's right. But we have improved our military industrial complex dramatically in the recent years, and the quality of our products were improved highly due to the Russian aggression. So we were not prepared for this, but we now understand that if one wants to be prepared to the war, it has to have a good quality products to defend itself. We don't want to have a war with Russia, and we believe that the military stuff that we are selling will not be used for aggressive, offensive actions. Yeah, but if the country wants to be secure, it has to have a good quality defense equipment.
Thank you. And what will be your message to our Pakistani business community who would like to invest in Ukraine?
The situation in Ukraine has stabilized. Both in economic, in political, and even in secure sense. So there is this conflict in the eastern Ukraine, but the rest of Ukraine is developing, and we have quite good projects for the increase of GDP for this year. It was +3%. We have good relations with the European Union. We have signed the association agreement and free trade agreement with the European Union. And Ukraine is becoming quite important partner and country in this region. So it's a good signal for Pakistani industries to invest into Ukraine.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Investor. Thank you so very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.